Hello and welcome back to the horror of video games. Today I want to talk about camera angles in horror games. Now, continuing from what I was talking about last time, about that feeling of dread before playing Resident Evil. Now, one of the factors that contribute to this dread has to be the static camera angles. You may say to me, why do the camera angles make the game scary? It's for a number of reasons. Static camera angles contribute to these questions in the player. These questions are like, who left the camera there? Or who's behind the camera? Or will someone come back for the camera? Or, if there is someone behind the camera, who is it? So, static camera angles in film or in games promote the question, who is behind the camera? Who is watching you? And the fact that you're being watched throughout the entire game of Resident Evil is very, very disturbing. Now, I recently watched Paranormal Activity 3, and in that film you have the static camera angles and the slow build-up and the suspense, and having static camera angles, just leaving a camera somewhere and just recording something, that's spooky. It begs the question, who is watching you? Will they come back for the camera? And this idea features throughout the entirety of Resident Evil Remake. And I have to say, it's an incredibly creepy feeling when you actually start to think about it, that throughout the whole game, you're being watched from this corridor to this corridor, and you're being watched as you do this and that, and it contributes also to this feeling of powerlessness. Now, in games like Alan Wake or Gears of War or etc., you have control over the camera. You have this reassurance that despite what's happening on the screen, at least you can control your viewpoint, at least you can control the perspective in which the horror occurs in the game. But when you take away that control and you have these static camera angles, it makes the player feel vulnerable, it makes the player feel naked almost, that they may be able to control their movement, but they can't control their viewpoint. And this is inherently scary. So we have to ask the question, who is watching the player? Who's watching the player in Resident Evil? And I think that my imagination of this is that it's the dead scientists that are watching the player. It's all the members of the residents. They've all died and they're all silently watching the player, watching their next move, and I think this is very, very creepy. If you think of it in those terms, if you think of the camera angles in terms of there's maybe a glass screen and the scientists are standing behind the glass screen just gazing. It's a very unnerving thought to think that you're being watched by the very people who have died in the building that you're exploring. So games with static camera angles will, in my opinion, always be scarier games than ones where you control the viewpoint, you control the camera angle, because it's this inherent feeling of powerlessness which makes the gameplay experience so scary. There's also this feeling of the Hitchcock-esque camera angles in Resident Evil, and it's almost like the action is trapped, the action is caged within the confines of the viewpoint. For example, in the film Psycho, you have camera angles which are in really strange positions in the house, like from top down from the ceiling, and this kind of camera angle is reflected in Resident Evil also, these kind of strange camera angles, and this happens throughout the game. You have the camera placed in these really weird places, and you open the door and then bam, there's a zombie right in front of you, and it really kind of catches the player off guard. You may open a door and there's something right in front of you, and I think it's a trick that's used in the game to constantly keep the player on edge. But I think definitely it's this feeling of being watched throughout the whole game which contributes to this feeling of dread, which is what I was talking about in one of the earlier videos, that it's the camera angles which are scary in this game. It sounds silly when you say it, but it's the camera angles in Resident Evil Remake which really are very, very scary when you start to think about it. So those are some of my thoughts on camera angles in horror games. Why don't you tell me what you think? Do you think camera angles contribute to the horror in video games? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to comment, rate and subscribe. You can tweet me at thehorrorofvg, or you can see my blog at thehorrorofvideogames.com. See you next time.